Hello, folks. Welcome back to English 200, World Literature 1. This will be the last video lecture for the entire semester. So as you can see here, this is going to be a video lecture on Module 12's Quiz 10, which comprises Acts 3, 4, and 5 of Othello. That quiz is due this coming Monday, November 15th. And because it's the majority of the play, Acts 3, 4, and 5, it will be a bit longer than other video lectures. And I'll be using each of the files for Acts 3, 4, and 5 to discuss the text. So I want to kind of briefly mention or follow up with what we were talking about last time in terms of Othello and the race issue. So in the folder, the Google Drive folder, you have all of these images. This is an image that appears in the introduction to the play. So it's going to be in the Act 1 file. And it's a woodcut engraving. Therefore, it's a, medieval or early Renaissance image of, as you can see, what we might call a Turk, if you will, to use the pejorative term, typically indicated here by the curved sword called a scimitar. But this character or caricature really with a turban is presumably someone from Africa, right? And as I mentioned last time, the word Moor, which appears in the subtitle of the play, the tragedy of Othello, the Moor of Venice. We're not sure if it was, in fact, someone from Africa, but Brabantio, and to a certain degree, Iago, the villain, Brabantio is the father of Desdemona. They both make allusions or, damning racial statements about Othello's blackness. But this image, which is actually really a copy of a portrait of the legitimate ambassador to England from, as you can see here, Barbary. And as I mentioned in the first lecture, Barbary would have been the name of the northern coast of Africa. That word Barbary appears again in this play when we learn that later, I believe it's in Act 5, that Desdemona's mother had a maid named Barbary, which signified that she was probably from northern Africa. But the Latin here is Legatus Regis Barbarii in Anglium, so translated to the legal representative to the queen or the regis in England or Anglium, and 1600. So it's very possible that Shakespeare could have seen, maybe from a distance, if not heard about this figure visiting and staying in England, because the play is written 1601, performed 1602 to 3 for the first time. So he might have been around, right? Again, there's the curved scimitar typical of Turks, along with the turban. But clearly he looks Middle Eastern, if you will, right? Or what we might call Berber, as opposed to African in genetics. So again, these two images are in the introduction, and it just kind of underscores the otherness, if you will, to use Edward Said's term from his groundbreaking work, Orientalism, um, the otherness of Othello, which is juxtaposed um, to Venice. So Venice at the time, and it's still, a pretty important city in Italy, but at the time it was a major trading hub and port for Italy and really for Southern Europe. As I mentioned in the first video lecture, it's kind of sort of like, say, Amsterdam or New Orleans to a certain degree, that there are canals that run through it because it's on the it's on the coast, and it's a very kind of like almost a series of islands connected together. And running through it is what's called Grand Canal. So here would be a kind of old map of it with the Grand Canal running through it. Here's a Italian map of it with, again, the Grand Canal. And the Doge's palace, or the Duke's palace, right here, the Palazzo Ducale, or the Duke's Plaza, would have been where, in Act 1 anyway, the Duke gathered Othello and others to discuss the Venetian army going to rout the Turks. Here's an aerial shot of it. Unfortunately, a year or so ago, it flooded fairly severely. But what I'm trying to, point out here is that at the time, this was considered a very cosmopolitan international hub or city. And so to have someone like Othello would have been both sort of normal because people were coming and going, but also in terms of the culture of Venice itself. Here's the Grand Canal with the Doge's Palace. He would have clearly been an outsider. Classic kind of gondolas that tourists use because it is it's a waterway city basically. Lots of bridges, and you can see up here like the watermark of some of the flooding over the years. And so just think of how or to what degree Othello would have fit in or not fit in. You remember Brabantio in Act 1 brings Othello to tell Brabantio about all the exploits he's been in. So yeah, I just wanted to kind of convey that to you about Venice. All right. I'll continue here with the play itself. Here we are in Act 1, or excuse me, Act 3, Scene 1, beginning of Act 3. So we're roughly beginning the middle of the play. All Shakespeare plays have 5 acts, and the middle would be roughly considered Act 3, though it's not exactly true for all the plays. But whenever you have a clown, as we do here, or in some other plays, a fool, capital F, it's a stock character or a character type that was fairly common in Renaissance and Elizabethan plays, not just Shakespeare. And they're there to add a bit of comic relief, which is what this short Act 3, Scene 1 does. I mean, you can see here that it lasts for maybe a full page. And what's happening here is there's some musicians, and there's a clown who's playing like the role of the jester, the joker, the fool. And he's basically insulting the musicians on their playing, their performance. So if you've ever seen like a recorder or a clarinet, these long instruments that you blow into and have stops and holes, then this is what the musicians are playing. And so the clown says, "Why, masters, have your instrument been in Naples, that they speak in the nose thus?" And if you are not reading the footnotes, you're missing a lot of information, right? So the footnote to footnote 1 here says that they sound so nasal. That is the squeaking of the recorder or clarinet type musician sounds squeaky and nasally. And then the editors go on to say, perhaps this is a reference to venereal disease, often associated with Naples, or a phallic or anal joke. So again, as I mentioned in the previous video lecture for Acts 1 and 2, this is part of the reason why this play is often not taught in high schools, because there's a lot of adult humor in here. And you might think of the clown here as a kind of, stand-up comedian role. And the punning, because that's what's going on here, the wordplay is basically on this word wind, right? And the musician responds to that comment from the clown. Well, how, sir? How? Like, what do you mean? Are these, I pray you, wind instruments? And the wind here is Shakespeare's double entendre, where it says in the footnote, the exchange that follows depends on the connection between wind instruments and flatulence, and tail versus tail, the different spelling of tail. Because the musician thinks that, oh, yes, yes, they are wind instruments because they're blowing in them like a clarinet or recorder. He says, "Aye, marry they are, sir." And then the clown said, "Oh, thereby hangs a tail," which is where the flatulence might come from, a different kind of tail that you would be sitting on, perhaps. And of course, the pun and the homonym, the word that sounds the same but means differently. The clown, or excuse me, the musician thinks, whereby hangs the tail, like, story, sir. So it goes on like this for a while, and it gives the audience, remember back in Shakespeare's time, these plays were performed in a kind of outdoor theater, amphitheater, and people would have been standing for a long time, especially the groundlings in the front. So it gives them a bit of comic relief. And, it helps because there's some pretty dire consequences in this. It's a tragedy after all. So Othello enters after this bit of humor, and Othello and, Iago and Cassio are talking here. Remember, at the end of Act 2, Iago had basically, given advice, almost marching orders to Cassio to go ply Desdemona, as he says, for your suit or your reinstatement back into being a lieutenant. And this is what is being asked here, or said, that my suit to her, he says here at the top of, or bottom of 1209, my suit to her is that she will, to virtuous Desdemona, procure me some access. And he, of course, is the her being referred to as your wife, who would be, of course, Iago's wife, Emilia. That access, right, it's, Shakespeare's punning again. He, on the one hand, means access to her chamber to discuss, hey, get me back in the good graces with your husband, the General Othello. But it also, especially for Iago, who's trying to set him up for the fall, implies a kind of access to Desdemona's body sexually. And then Iago leaves, knowing that information, and then ironically, Cassio says, as many people do in the play, I never knew a Florentine more kind and honest. Iago is not a Florentine, of course Cassio is, but what he's saying is, I'm a Florentine and he's like me, basically kind and honest, which, we know Iago is anything but. So finally we have Emilia enter. Now Emilia, again, is the wife of Iago. And one question I want to pose to you when you're thinking about this play is, to what degree does Emilia become responsible for her maid, who is Desdemona, for her maid, her boss, Desdemona's downfall? And I say this because she, in effect, allows Cassio to come visit her, right? She says here toward the end that, the more he protests he loved you, Othello, says he loves you, and heeds no other suitor but his likings, to take the safest occasion by the front to bring you in again. Front meaning the forelock. So she's basically saying that, look, he was upset, but, he doesn't intend to, pursue the matter any further, and just kind of leave it as it is. But then Cassio kind of doesn't want to leave it there, obviously, right? Give me some advantage of some brief discourse with Desdemona alone, which, remember, would be back then very unseemly for a married woman, and newlywed at that, really, to be seen alone, especially in her own room, with an unmarried man, or even just a man in general. And also notice that he calls her by the familiar Desdemona instead of Desdemona, which there's some evidence in the play that Cassio and Desdemona knew each other before Othello and Desdemona eloped, knew each other to a degree. We're not sure, whether they actually dated or just moved into the same social circles. But then Emilia does say, okay, pray you come in. I will bestow you where you shall have time to speak your bosom or heart freely, right? And so again, to what degree is Emilia responsible for bringing down her own chamber, or her own boss, or woman, lady? So this very short scene, it's just a couple of lines really, is simply to let us know that Iago and Othello are still kind of colluding, right? But this letter is important to know, because it's him, as Othello, sending information back to Venice about, what happened to the Turks, and it says here, by him I do my duties, send my respects to the Senate of Venice, right? Because later in the play there will be another letter back from the Senate. I won't give it away at the moment, but so there some kind of behind the scenes communication between Othello and Venice. All right, the kind of longer act, or longer scene in the act. So here we have Desdemona, Cassio, and Emilia. And Desdemona, basically invites Cassio in, and they start talking about his role, right? Bounteous madam to Desdemona, whatever shall become of Michael Cassio, he's never anything but your true servant. And of course, this is Cassio, but when he's speaking of himself in the third person, right, of Michael Cassio and I'm Michael Cassio, it's a way to kind of remind us, as he said at the end of Act 2, that he's lost his reputation, right, that he's not the same person anymore, though he wants to be. And so basically here is where Desdemona says, that I'll help you in your cause. But the way she describes it is very intense. Um, do not doubt that before Emilia here, like in front of, as like my witness, um, I, I give thee warrant or assurance of thy place, which is like her already sort of saying, yeah, the deal's done. Just wait till I talk to my husband Othello. Assure thee, if I do vow of friendship, I'll perform it to the last article, right? In other words, to any friend, I will go to the greatest lengths to keep my promise. My lord, that's Othello, my lord shall never rest, which is true. As we will see, she will make him restless with her importuning or questioning to have Cassio reinstated. Watch him tame and talk him out of patience. His bed shall seem a school, his board, the table, a shrift. I'll intermingle everything he does with Cassio's suit. So Iago's plan is working, that is, Cassio's gotten in to see Desdemona and she's agreed. But this will, of course, backfire on her because the last thing that Othello is going to want to hear is, information about Cassio, especially from his wife, whom, Iago has basically, is basically saying that he's cheating on Desdemona with Cassio. So notice the quick stage directions, right? So enter Othello and Iago, and then pretty quickly exit Cassio. And, plays are meant to be seen and performed. So you got to kind of imagine in your mind that Cassio is sort of like not running away, although Iago characterizes it like that here. But it's just a kind of, juxtaposition of coming and going, so to speak, that Shakespeare makes. But Iago takes advantage of that and says, ha, I like not that. And this is one of many in the play moments where Iago plants the seeds of suggestion for Othello. The suggestion being that something's up romantically between Cassio and Desdemona. And what Iago is doing here, and we learn this in Act 1 in the soliloquy, is that he's playing upon this stereotypical and unfortunate notion that Othello, because he's a person of color, is readily susceptible to jealousy and also being gullible, right? Gullible meaning believing what someone will tell you. So believing those two things of Othello's character, he's going to, like here, suggest that Cassio is leaving because he was just having sex with her, basically, or courting her, if not having sex. And of course, Othello at this point is somewhat like going, "What? What are you talking about? Ha! I like not that." What does Sal say? Like, what are you saying? Nothing, my lord. See, like he throws it out there and like sort of take it back. Or if not, I know not what. Was not that Cassio parted from my wife? And then he, Iago pretends like, oh, I don't know, even though he brought up the whole, event and tried to make Othello look over there to see Cassio leaving. Cassio, my lord? No, sure, I cannot think it, that he would steal away so guilty like seeing your coming. Well, who put up Cassio to seeing Desdemona? Iago, of course, right? So again, he's an engineer in the play, a puppet master, chess master, putting people where and how he likes them. And she says, when he's Othello there with his wife, I've been talking here with a suitor here, a man that languishes in your displeasure. This word suitor is another kind of, it's not a pun, but it's a double valence, double connotation here. On the one hand, of course, it means fundamentally Cassio's suit or case to be reinstated as lieutenant. But of course, the other familiar meaning of suitor is a man who is seeking to pursue a woman's romantic favors, right? So the fact that she uses that word is kind of telling here. And, of course, Othello hears it. And, of course, we're talking about Cassio the lieutenant. Yeah, the plan that Iago has instituted works, or is beginning to work, I should say. So this is also kind of important, that once right here, once Desdemona and Emilia leave, it's now just the two men, Iago and Othello, talking, right? And at this point, Othello isn't too upset with Desdemona because he hasn't heard all of the lies that Iago will tell here. And this is a kind of metaphorically important line when he says, excellent wretch, affectionately, right? I don't think you would typically call your significant other a wretch, but he means it in a kind of teasing way. Perdition, which is damnation or hell. Damnation or perdition, catch my soul, but I do love thee. And when I love thee not, chaos has come again, which would basically be a foreshadowing, right? That when he's fallen out of love with Desdemona, chaos will come. And in fact, it will. It needs to. It's a tragedy. And then Iago again with the seeds of suggestion. Did Michael Cassio, when you wooed my lady, meaning not his wife, but the lady of, the citadel, the Desdemona, did Michael Cassio, when you wooed my lady, know of your love, that is, know of your affection for Desdemona? And Othello says here, and this is where we learn that they obviously, Desdemona and Cassio knew each other before the elopement. He did from first to last. Why dost thou ask? But for satisfaction of my thought, no further harm. Why of thy thought, Iago? Like, again, planning, like he's got to tease out the information from Iago, which is exactly what, Iago's doing, kind of reeling him in with these suggestions. And he says here, I think not, I did not think he, meaning Cassio, had been acquainted with her. Oh, yes, and went between us very oft. Indeed. And the went between us, meaning, again, moved in the same social circles, not between us like as, we're having a threesome with her. So there's, this punning again on honesty, right? Is he not honest? Of course, we're talking about Cassio. Is he not honest? Honest, my lord? Honest, aye, honest. My lord, for aught I know, or for all I know. What dost thou think? Think, my lord? Think, my lord? He's just, toying with him here. That is, Iago's basically like a cat and mouse kind of thing, toying with Othello's imagination, really, and it gets worse. So he says, ironically, for Michael Cassio, I dare be sworn that I think he is honest. And it's that word, I think, not I know he's honest. I think he is, right? But how do you really know someone's honest unless they show you their deeds, right? Let me skip a bit here. Here in this section, Iago is almost taunting Othello without giving him the full skinny and scope of, the vision, if you will, that Iago is trying to paint between Desdemona and Cassio. And at this point, Othello says, "By heaven, I'll know thy thoughts." Um, and he says, "You cannot, if my heart were in your hand, nor shall not whilst 'tis in my custody." And this is Shakespeare's very kind of subtle way of reminding us of the two motivating factors behind revenge for uh, Iago. On the one hand, it's being passed over for promotion instead of being promoted to lieutenant. Cassio is, and on the other hand, it's he believes, or he can't prove it, that Othello has slept with his wife Emilia. So when he says, "I'll know thy thoughts," and Iago's like, you cannot know like just how much I hate you and my seething revenge for you if my heart were in your hand. Um, Nor shall you know my thoughts while it's in my custody, that is, while I have my heart in my custody. And then Iago says one of the famous lines in this play, "Oh, beware, my lord, of jealousy. It is the green-eyed monster which doth mock the meat it feeds on. That cuckold lives in bliss, who, certain of his fate, loves not the wronger." So again, the footnotes give us a lot of information, talking about a jealous person. This notion of jealousy is think of green with envy, right? Is a very kind of old trope, if you will, but it is exactly what Iago is trying to do to Othello's mind and imagination. He is trying to incense Othello with jealousy, so much so that it begins to gnaw at him persistently until it consumes him, which it will. And then he says something, and therefore the meat that it's feeding on is you, the person, or a person's brain. And then he says this information about a cuckold, which I'll explain here in a minute, that the cuckold lives in bliss, who, certain of his fate, loves not his wronger. And the footnote says here that who, knowing it is his fate to be cuckold, doesn't love his wife. So this is a theme, cuckold and cuckoldry, a theme that runs throughout Acts 3, 4, and 5. You could maybe even say the entire play. And a cuckold is a character type, if you will, and still happens today. So very simply put, a cuckold is the husband of a wife who cheats on him. So it has to be that relationship. It doesn't work the other way around. So it's a man who is married and his wife cheats on him. And this is highly ironic because, as I mentioned earlier, with the list of characters in the play, talking about Bianca, Bianca's role in this play, or her occupation, is a courtesan. So a high price escort, if you will, at court. But that was kind of acceptable in this era, that as long as wives were not presented publicly with the information that a husband was cheating on his wife, then they could, save face, so to speak, and turn a blind eye. So there's obviously a patriarchal double standard going on. But if it were found out that a wife had cheated on a husband, and somehow that became public knowledge, or other people found out about it, it was as though the man had been stripped of his masculinity. And the whole point is that, as we'll see here with the horns, is that a man, a real man, should keep his wife satisfied at home sexually and not need to worry about going out and looking for a lover. So this medieval woodcut engraving shows a man with horns, and the horns are supposed to mock the fact that the husband was not horny enough. And yes, they did have that connotation of the word centuries ago, well before Shakespeare's era. So, here's the wife, right? Here's the cuckold with horns again, right? And so there will be this reference in the play to a forked or forked plague that is a plague or bad thing of being cheated on, but it's because the husband seen here kneeling down while everyone else is mocking him with horns, right? And there's the wife or the woman who has done the cheating. Back in the day, what they would do is they would take a cuckold and put horns on him and turn him around backwards on a donkey or an ass and parade him through town and jeer at him and throw rotten food at him and stuff like that. So it was a very kind of public embarrassment and humiliation. There's the cuckold again in the picture in the background. So this begins, as I mentioned a moment ago, this section here, where he says that cuckold lives in bliss, that is, lives, like doesn't have to think about it, who certain of his fate loves not his wronger. He's just basically saying, kind of, twisted Shakespearean syntax, that as long as the cuckold doesn't know who it is, even though he's certain that his wife will cheat on him at some point, then he can live in bliss, right? And what Iago's meaning here is that, hey, Othello, your wife Desdemona, newlywed, is cheating on you, but as long as you don't know who it is and don't have to acknowledge it publicly, then, it's okay. Of course, Othello is, incensed at this, and he says, thinkst thou I'd make my life a jealousy to follow still the changes of the moon with fresh suspicions? Like, do you think I want to go down this road and like be consumed by jealousy, which will of course be, like the moon, be gravitated toward? That's, high tide, low tide occurs because of the gravitation of the moon. So cuckoldry will become a theme throughout this play. So what they do is they kind of make a pact, right? But let's see. He says here that Iago, observe her well with Cassio, wear your eyes thus, not jealous nor secure, I just want you to see. And so what is going to happen again, of course, is that Iago is going to make it to where Cassio and Desdemona are, seen together or seen by other people together, right, to make it look as though they're actually having an affair. And then he says here, in Venice, they do let God see the pranks they dare not show their husbands. And he's talking about women here. In Venice, the Venetian women, they let God see, God sees everything, and they let God see the pranks or the adulterous affairs they dare not show their husbands. Their best conscience is not to leave it undone, but keep it unknown. So he's trying to say here that even though Desdemona may be doing it, she's going to keep it from you, keep it unknown from you, Othello. And then as a reminder from Act 1, when Brabantio has already learned of the elopement between Othello and Desdemona, he incredibly reluctantly gives the hand to to Othello, Desdemona's hand to Othello. And Iago reminds him of this right here. She did deceive her father, eloping, right? Marrying you. And when she seemed to shake and fear your looks, she loved them most. And so she did. So he's remembering that, like, oh, yeah, that's right. So again, scenes of suggestion. And then once, or just before Iago leaves here, we have Othello already questioning, why did I marry this honest creature, doubtless sees and knows more, much more than he unfolds. And the he here is Iago. He hasn't quite left the stage yet, but he's beginning to think like, wow, my longtime honest friend Iago is telling me the truth, and now I'm regretting being married to Desdemona. And finally, Iago leaves, and this is where we get a soliloquy with Othello again. The irony, this fellow, Iago's, of exceeding honesty, which of course we know he's not. He's everything but. And he is going to list some reasons why possibly Desdemona could be cheating on him. Happily, or perhaps happily, for I am black. So this is where we get in terms of whether he's a Moor or a Berber or Middle Eastern, where we get Othello announcing his skin color. Happily, for I'm black, or perhaps I'm black, and have not those soft parts of conversation or easy manners that chamberers or gallants have. Again, this is what I was mentioning earlier about, he's in a very kind of sophisticated cosmopolitan city like Venice, and he's a soldier, so he's not as perhaps educated and refined as these other men like Cassio, or who's from Florence, or Roderigo, supposedly. Or he says, maybe for I'm declined into the vale of years, right? Maybe it's because I'm older and she wants a younger man, right? But anyway, he's quite beginning to really believe in just the mere suspicion of adultery. And he says, oh, curse of marriage, that we can call these delicate creatures, wives, women, ours, and not their appetites. That is, they're our wives, but their sexual appetite is not ours. And then this is where he picks up the cuckold theme again. Yet 'tis the plague of great ones, that is, adultery or cuckoldry. Prerogatived or privileged, are they less than the base or lowborn? In other words, they even could be as high as the Duke or senators. Adultery knows no class or status. It is, or 'tis destiny unshunnable like death. It's that humiliating, right? Even then, this forked, whenever you see in Shakespeare a backward accent mark, it is meant to be pronounced not forked, but forked. And that is because actually the vast majority of Shakespeare's writing is in verse, is in poetic meter, typically iambic pentameter. So he gets an extra syllable out of the ed, even when this forked plague is fated to us, when we do quicken. And the footnote 8 says here, this plague of horns, imagined to grow from the forehead of a cuckold, is our fate as soon as we live. This is a bit, ironic. Again, think of the double standard of it's okay for men to cheat on women, but I think, this tells us something about the way in which either Shakespeare or Shakespeare's era, the Renaissance, Elizabethan period, they viewed women, right? That they had to, like Desdemona before she got married, they had to be kept under lock and key because they just, couldn't help themselves sexually. They were, nymphomaniacs or something. But in fact, it goes both ways, right? Obviously. But if a man is, found to have been cuckolded, it's like death, he says. So enter Desdemona and Emilia, and look exactly what he says as soon as she comes in. Look where she comes. If she be false or a cheater, oh, then heaven mocks itself. I'll not believe it, right? That is, he looks at her, he can't believe this brand new, young, newlywed, fair as she is, would be cheating on him already and right away with Cassio. And there's a bit of a pun here. I have a pain on my forehead. I mean, he's got like a kind of a headache, if you will, or, some kind of mental problem, but, it's a reminder of the horns, the horns grow from the head. But this is actually a kind of foreshadowing what will occur in Act 4, which is he will go into an epileptic trance or fit. So, he really may have some mental brain problem here at the time. And so this is the scene where we first learn about the handkerchief, the famous symbol in the play. It's variously called a napkin, right? Because of course you put a napkin in your lap. And it's meant as, far back as the medieval era, Middle Ages, as a representation or a token of a man's affection for a woman. I mean, this sort of perhaps modern equivalent might be a promise ring, or, wearing your boyfriend's Letterman jacket, or, wearing his high school or college ring on a necklace, or, that kind of thing. But it was a handkerchief that women had about them, whether, to wipe their tears or blow the nose or whatever you would have a handkerchief for. But notice what happens here. And again, let's think about Emilia. He's upset, having heard just what he heard from Iago. He says, your napkin is too little. There's a little bit of a sexual pun there, because of course a napkin goes in the lap, and what's in the lap of a woman is her genitals. He, the husband, puts the napkin from him, it drops. So this is where we need to ask about Emilia. So it drops on the floor, and then Othello tells her to let it alone, like, don't worry about it. It's on the floor. Come, I'll go in with you. And Desdemona says, I'm very sorry that you're not well. And so leave everyone, because it's just three, Desdemona, Emilia, and Othello. And then the only person we have on the scene or the stage is Emilia. So this is a little soliloquy by Emilia. And then ask yourself, again, to what degree is she culpable or responsible for Desdemona's downfall? I'm glad I found this napkin. This was her first remembrance from the Moor, right? The first token or gift from the Moor. And she knows this, Emilia does. My wayward husband, so she even knows that he's, not the greatest guy. My wayward husband hath 100 times wooed me to steal it, but she so loves the token, for he conjured her she would ever keep it. We'll look at the footnote here. And that word conjure is kind of important here, because we'll learn that has magic in it. That she reserves it evermore about her, that is, she has it always about her, to kiss and talk to. I'll have the work taken out. And that means the embroidered copied here. So, and I'll have the work taken out and give it to Iago. In other words, she's saying, well, I'll go, get the, and we'll learn it's Bianca, person to make a copy of it, and I'll give the copy to Iago, but gave the real thing back to Desdemona. But that's not exactly how it goes down. What will he do with it? Heaven knows, not I. I nothing but to please his fantasy. Excuse me. So she takes the handkerchief, knowing full well that it's a, token and first gift from Othello to Desdemona. And as her chambermaid, her lady's maid, rather than give it back to her lady, she gives it to her husband. And then, of course, she gives it to right away to Iago because he comes in. I have a thing for you, meaning the handkerchief, but in Shakespeare parlance, that had a double entendre, double meaning of genitals, basically, sex. I have a thing for you. And his response to her is damning. Remember, this is his wife. You have a thing for me. It is a common thing. Common meaning not only are genitals common, but yours is common because it gets around. Remember, he thinks, though he can't prove it, that she has slept with Othello. So there's the handkerchief being given, right? He takes the napkin. And she even says, if it be not for some purpose of import, that is, something of importance, give it me again. Poor lady shall run mad when she shall lack it, right? So she knows that she's already Desdemona is going to regret not having the napkin. So again, Othello enters the scene, and now we have another exchange between Othello and Iago, and it's just more of the same seeds of suggestion of adultery, right? And Othello is quickly becoming susceptible to the jealousy, like here he says, oh, now forever, farewell the tranquil mind, farewell content, farewell plumed troops and the big wars that make ambition virtue. Othello's occupation's gone. In other words, it's sort of at this point where he's really beginning to buy into this scheme of Iago's of supposed adultery. And he doesn't want to quite believe it yet, so he, grabs Iago by the throat, kind of chokes him, and says, "Villain," which is true. He really is a villain. Iago is, "Villain, be sure to prove my love a whore. Be sure of it. Give me the ocular proof, or by the worth of my eternal soul, thou hadst better been born a dog than answer my waked wrath." So he's asking for the ocular proof, like, show me, like, I need to see this with my own eyes, right? Or he goes on to say, make me to see it, or at least prove it so that the probation or the proof bear no hinge or loop to hang a doubt on or woe upon my life. Meaning, I need to believe it's like a solid case. Preferably, I like to see it, right? Or at least prove it to me that, it's beyond a shadow of doubt, so to speak. But that's exactly what Iago will do. He will use not, undeniable, tangible evidence, like, say, DNA, but he will use circumstantial evidence. He will frame both Cassio and Desdemona, which he's really already been doing. I see you're eaten up with passion, right? Remember, jealousy is the green-eyed monster that doth mock the meat it feeds upon. Again, asking for a reason. Give me a living reason she's disloyal. And this is a nice pun on Shakespeare's part here. He says, like, to answer the question, I do not like the duty, if you will, of answering this question of why she's disloyal. Like, I don't want to tell you, but I want to tell you. But the truth is, it goes back to his first motivation for revenge. I do not like the office, right? It's true. He doesn't like being passed over for promotion for lieutenant. And here is more of this circumstantial evidence that he's planting. And there's a bit of speculation among scholars that maybe the misogyny that Iago portrays, as we've seen before, and this right here, that maybe he's on the down low bi or gay, because Now, you got to keep in mind that they are, in fact, in a military setting where, of course, in the military, it's not a homosexual environment, it's a homosocial environment, all same sex, typically in the barracks. So it's not uncommon, of course, for men to be sharing a tent or, uh, lodgings together, as he says. So this is the reason why she's disloyal. I will go on. I lay with Cassio lately, meaning like they're sharing, I don't know, a bed, a cot, tent. I lay with Cassio lately, and being troubled with a raging tooth, and that can be seen as a double entendre for an erection, to be quite honest. I could not sleep, but maybe, if you've ever had an actual toothache, it's difficult to sleep through that. There are kind of men so loose of soul that in their sleeps will mutter their affairs. So he's basically portraying Cassio as someone who talks in his sleep. One of this kind is Cassio. In sleep, I heard him say, "Sweet Desdemona, let us be wary, let us hide our loves," with a bit of a sexual pun there. And then, sir, would he grip and wring my hand, like it's Desdemona's hand, cry, "Oh, sweet creature," then kiss me hard, as if he plucked up kisses by the roots. So, not like a peck on the mouth, but like a French kiss that grew upon my lips, lay his leg over my thigh, and sigh and kiss and cry, "Cursed fate that gave thee to the Moor," as though Cassio were saying that to Desdemona. Of course, any husband or partner would, envisioning that would respond, "Oh, monstrous, monstrous," right? Nay, this was but his dream, right? And so this plays into a big underlying theme in the play, which is appearance versus reality. You could argue it's really in all Shakespeare plays, appearance versus reality. But you can't really fault someone for their dream, but the fact that it's supposedly a manifestation, the dream is, of Cassio actually having done something with Desdemona in real life, right? And then he hears just hearing this is not evidence. It's just, hey, I'm your friend. You'll trust me. So I'm going to tell you that, yeah, this is what Cassio said. It's in a supposed dream. And Othello says, "I'll tear her all to pieces." Like he's that angry. And then to kind of make the jealousy quicken even more, tell me about this. Have you not sometimes seen a handkerchief spotted with strawberries in your wife's hand? And it famously has strawberries on it. I gave her such a one. 'Twas my first gift. I know not that, but such a handkerchief, I am sure it was your wife's. Did I today see Cassio wipe his beard with? Oh, I'll let you again make up the sexual connotation there because a napkin goes in the lap, as I mentioned. So, this just incenses Othello, of course. Oh, that the slave had 40,000 lives, meaning Cassio is a slave. One is too poor, too weak for my revenge. Now do I see 'tis true. Arise, black vengeance from the hollow hell. So he's already now, excuse me, he's already now vowing vengeance on Cassio. We're just hearing this. And so they make this, as I mentioned earlier, this little pact here. They both kneel in a kind of like blasphemous, um, marriage of the mind, so to speak, because back in the day, still traditional churches do this, that both the bride and groom, they kneel before the altar in front of the priest. So they're both kneeling here. And the command basically is to kill Cassio, right? So they rise from this pact. And to make it clear, within these 3 days, let me hear thee say that Cassio is not alive. My friend is dead. Sure, no problem. I gotcha. 'Tis done at your request, but let her live, right? Don't kill her. Of course, that's the planting of seeds of suggestion again. certainly wants to have Desdemona be taken out too. So the scene changes here, and it's Desdemona, Emilia, and the clown, right? And so she's looking for Lieutenant Cassio, which, you know, again, a married woman looking for an unmarried man out in public is not probably the best look on her part. So Othello finally comes in on this scene, and she is going to start talking about Cassio. This is exactly what she should not be doing. And then Othello says, "Give me your hand. This hand is moist, my lady." This is one of these, I mean, you could say forensic scientist and, you know, a polygraph detector test. You know, this relies on this kind of physiological response to say that if your hands or palms are sweaty, that somehow it's indication of infidelity or a lie. It had felt no age nor no sorrow. That is my hand, right? It's young and it's never done anything to be sorrowful about. This argues fruitfulness and a liberal heart, hot, hot, and moist, right? So he's going to ask about the handkerchief. He says, "Lend me thy handkerchief," right? And he's, of course, asking for the strawberry one. And so offering a handkerchief. And she has one, but it's not the strawberry colored or strawberry embroidered one. "I have it not about me." Now remember, Othello said, when it dropped, let it alone. And then they walked out of the room together. So, you know, he's not thinking in his right mind, but he's going to criticize her for that anyway. He says, that's a fault. That is, that you don't have it with you. That's a fault. And here we have the story of the handkerchief. "That handkerchief did an Egyptian to my mother give." So it first comes from what he calls a charmer here, or a sorceress in Egypt. And again, this kind of lends to the exoticism and otherness of Othello as a character. And the charmer, the woman who gave this handkerchief to my mother, she was a charmer and could almost read the thoughts of people. She told her, that is, the charmer told my mother, while she kept it, it would make her amiable or desirable and subdue my father entirely to her love. Kind of like a love potion, but, you know, magic. "But if she lost it or made a gift of it, my father's eye is, you know, looking at other women, my father's eye should hold her loathed, and his spirit should hunt after new fancies or new women. She, my mother, dying, gave it me and bid me, when my fate would have me wived, to give it to her," to Desdemona. "I did so, and take heed on it. Make it a darling, like your precious eye. To lose it or give it away were such perdition or damnation as nothing else could catch." And then he goes on and says, "There's magic in the web of it." So a couple of things about this. On the one hand, it reminds us of, you know, the web that Iago is, you know, weaving to ensnare everyone in the play. But also it harkens back to Act 1 when Brabantio accuses Othello of using a kind of magic or black magic on Desdemona to subdue her, to win her. And here he supposedly says, "There's magic in the web of this token that I first gave you," right? Whether it's true or not, we don't know, but there's a bit of contradiction here, that he says he didn't use magic in Act 1, when in fact here he says there's magic in it. Who knows? Could be just telling fibs. He tells her, "Fetch it, let me see it. Fetch me the handkerchief, the handkerchief, the handkerchief, the handkerchief." He keeps saying, of course, she doesn't have it. She doesn't have it. And he's just livid, right? So Iago and Cassio enter now after Othello has gone. And we're going to learn here that he's going to put Cassio in a position, if you will, where Othello will be able to overhear his conversation with Iago, right? Which occurs here in Act 4. So Iago and Othello enter beginning of Act 4, and he's talking here about an unauthorized kiss, of course, meaning this, infidelity between Cassio, supposed infidelity between Cassio and Desdemona. And Iago kind of makes a joke here. Remember, he's the really crude one in the play. Or to be naked with her friend in bed an hour or more, not meaning any harm. Like, come on, like who would do that? And then in like kind, Othello kind of agrees by saying, naked in bed, Iago, and not mean harm. It is hypocrisy against the devil. That's what the devil wants, right? It wants cheating and adultery. So he's going to, Iago, do some more power of suggestion here, and this time it's going to be graphic about what Cassio said or did. What hath he said? What has Cassio said? Faith that he did. I know not what he did. Like he doesn't want to say. What? Lie? Meaning here, lie is in tell a fib or falsehood. But of course, lie can also mean to lie down, which is what humans do. They recline, not lay. So he says lie, and then he's hanging there, and then Othello, quick to suspicion and anger with her, like lie with her. And then he says here, lie with her, on her, what you will. Right? Like, yeah, he's lying with her and he's doing whatever he wants when he's doing it, right? And of course, this just sends him into, as it says here, an epileptic trance, basically. So it's when Othello falls into this trance here, what we call an aside, because of course, Othello's on the stage, but Iago's there, and he says this line that Othello can't hear because he's having an epileptic fit, basically. Work on, my medicine works, meaning like, my poison, my jealousy is working. And he says, thus credulous or gullible fools are caught. And then quickly Cassio enters the scene, and Othello's still down. My lord's fallen into an epilepsy. This is his second fit. He had one yesterday. So apparently, Othello really does have epilepsy, or at least some kind of mental brain issue, right? And knowing that, because Iago and Othello have been friends for a long time, and later Othello will say he's wringing his brain, if you will, like wrought iron, like twisting hot molten iron. So the engineer puppeteer of the play, Iago, literally places Cassio around the corner. He says, do you withdraw yourself, leave for a little bit. Do you withdraw yourself a little while? He will recover straight or soon. When he is gone, I would on great occasion speak with you. So Cassio leaves, right? And then they talk a little bit about the, cuckold of horns in his head. And he says to, Iago says to Othello, do but encave yourself, right? Or hide yourself. So what he's going to do, and the way they represent this in the film, is that they're basically like in a jail setting, and Othello is going to go like in one of the cells so that Cassio cannot see him, but of course Othello can hear Cassio, and out of sight, Othello is going to eavesdrop on a conversation between Iago and Cassio. And he says here, Iago to Othello, for I will make him, meaning Cassio, for I make him tell tell the tale, that is the affair, will make him tell the tale anew, where, how oft, how long, and when he hath and is again to cope or, copulate, have sex with your wife. So Othello stands apart, right? And this has to be another aside because, obviously Othello cannot hear this, but Iago says, now will I question Cassio of Bianca. Remember, Bianca is the courtesan who has a fancy, taken a fancy of Cassio, because remember, Cassio's good looking and, is a lieutenant. She is a hussy that by selling her desires buys herself bread and cloth. So she's a prostitute or courtesan, as it says in the list of characters. It is a creature that dotes on Cassio, as 'tis the strumpet's plague to beguile many and be beguiled by one. He, when he hears of her, that is Cassio, when Cassio hears of Bianca, he, when he hears of Bianca, cannot restrain himself, restrain from the excess of laughter. So right on cue, Cassio comes back in like Iago told him, and he starts talking about Desdemona, but then he'll switch to, the other way around. He starts talking about Bianca and Cassio, and then he'll switch in mid-gear to Desdemona. Ply Desdemona well, and you're sure on it. In other words, ply your suit with her, but ply has that other meaning of, like between the legs. And now if this suit lie in Bianca's power, how quickly should you speed? And in the film, the way this is represented is that it's sort of said under Iago's breath so that right next to him, Cassio can hear it, but around the corner, Othello cannot hear it. And then when Catlef is wretch, or sort of like minx in a certain way, he's laughing here, Cassio is, but about Bianca, not about Desdemona. But of course, that's what Othello thinks, that Cassio's laughing about Desdemona. She, meaning Bianca, but of course now, the she can be referred to as Desdemona. She gives it out that you shall marry her. Do you intend it? Right? And of course, he doesn't intend anything at all, right? I marry what? A customer, prithee, bear some charity to my wit. So he's just basically, called Desdemona to Othello's ears, a prostitute, right? What, I marry, a courtesan, I'm a customer. What are you talking about? So, yeah. This is the monkeys giving out. She persuaded, I will marry her out of her own love and flattery, not of my promise. Of course, he's talking about Bianca, but Othello thinks it's about Desdemona. So anyway, Bianca, because again, Iago has orchestrated all this. Bianca enters, and she's a bit livid, understandably. Because she has the handkerchief. Remember, she's supposed to make a copy of it, says Emilia, right? But she thinks that, it belongs to some other woman, which of course it does. What did you mean by that same handkerchief you gave me even now? I was a fine fool to take it. I must take it out or make a copy of the whole work, a likely piece of work that you should find it in your chamber, and I know not who left it there. This is some minx's token, and I must take out the work. There, give it your hobby horse. And of course, Othello's seeing all this, right? This is the ocular proof that Iago says he can produce for Othello. That, look, you see that the handkerchief is being thrown back in Cassio's face because it was found in his chamber, so to speak. Yeah. And he believes it. By heaven, that should be my handkerchief, because of course it has the strawberries on it. And once Cassio leaves, right, He's like, how shall I murder him, Iago? Not should I, but how shall I murder him? And did you see the handkerchief? Right? Um, his heart is turned to stone. Othello's is, right? Meaning he's really not of him like himself anymore. And again, he says here, I'll chop her into messes, cuckold me, meaning Desdemona, he's going to kill, right? And he says, get me some poison, right? That he wants to poison her. But guess who comes up with the actual method of murder? It's, of course, Iago. Do it not with poison, strangle her in her bed, even the bed she hath contaminated. Good, good, the justice of it pleases very good. So Iago chooses Desdemona's method of death. Lodovico is a new character in the play, but he's one of the senators back at Venice, and he has come to Cyprus. Again, remember that letter I mentioned earlier that Othello had sent? Well, Lodovico's bringing one back. And it says, the Duke and the senators of Venice greet you. And Othello reads the letter, but it's not good news, right? And it says here, good cousin Lodovico. Now, we don't know if in fact really they are cousins or if it was, that kind of polite Venetian society that we all move in the same social circles and are distantly related in that way, kind of courtesan, courtly manners cousin. But in either case, they certainly know each other, and where is it? Othello reads the letter, and he's not happy with it, right? Says Desdemona, I would do much to atone them for the love I bear to Cassio. And she had been talking about the issue with Lodovico, that, falling out of commission with Othello. And the love is not actual love, but it's, friendship love, we might say. But of course, Othello hears this and fire and brimstone, he's angry. My lord, are you wise? What is he angry? Maybe the letter moved him. Lodovico says, for as I think they do command him home, deputing Cassio in his government. So what they're doing here is Venice is removing, because the Turks have been routed, he's no longer needed, and Othello is a general, he's needed back in Venice. So they're removing Othello from Cyprus, and they need someone in charge of Cyprus while Othello's gone. But they didn't necessarily know that Cassio was no longer, decommissioned, so to speak. So they're deputing Cassio, or putting Cassio in Othello's government or charge or position, right? And so she says here, unwittingly, by my truth or troth, I'm glad on it, that I'm glad they're sending you home, and that means we can go, right? So this just, of course, incenses Othello all the more. He's like very kind of cynical here. I'm glad to see you mad. Why, sweet Othello? What devil? And he strikes her. And then Lodovico says, my lord, this would not be believed in Venice, though I should swear I saw it. In other words, domestic violence, which is clearly what this is something that would have been done in private, because even back in Venice, patriarchal though it is, that would have considered huge faux pas and social ills to do that in public, right? But it just kind of shows everyone just how angry and incensed and jealous and vengeful now that Othello has become. Lodovico, Othello tells Lodovico, I'm commanded home. Sir, I obey the mandate and will return to Venice. Cassio shall have my place, right? And, there's a bit of pun on that, place, meaning duties, but also perhaps, his wife. 4.2, Othello and Emilia. And he's questioning here Emilia about potential adultery, right? Like, you're the chambermaid. Did you see her? You have seen nothing then, nor never heard, nor suspected, right? And then, of course, Emilia lies here, basically, right? You have seen nothing then, nor heard, or did ever suspect. She could have at that time said, well, yeah, I actually let Cassio and Desdemona talk together privately, right? But she doesn't want to implicate herself, understandably. So she leaves, and then it's just Desdemona and Emilia. And pretty soon we're going to have a scene here between the women that is really important. He calls Desdemona to her face, a whore. Like, what? Not a whore? Of course, she denies it. And then he dismisses Emilia, not just in person, but in terms of occupation. He says, I cry you mercy then. I took you for that cunning whore of Venice, right? He calls her whore of Venice in front of, Emilia, that married with Othello, right? That he's talking about himself in the third person. You mistress, meaning Emilia, you mistress that have the office opposite to St. Peter and keep the gate of hell. So he's like characterizing her as this kind of, if you think of Paradise Lost, sin and death supposedly guard the gates of hell. The sin is this kind of witchy, demon-esque figure with hellhounds growing out of her vagina. So he's characterizing her in that horrible light, but he gives her, Emilia, money, right? You, I, you. We have done our course, our business, right? There's money for your pains. And so like a kind of Judas, he's giving her money, but he's in effect dismissing her formally here. Like, all right, we're done, And so there's this discussion between Emilia and her husband, right? That's, you're a villain because you've taken this handkerchief and, implicated me. But oh yeah, let's not forget Roderigo. Roderigo, understandably, is also upset with Iago. And he says, I wasted myself out of my means, my money. The jewels you have had from me to deliver Desdemona would have half corrupted a votarist or none. You have told me she hath received them and returned my expectations and comforts of sudden respect and acquaintance, but I find none. So Roderigo, who's a dandy, a fop, still trying to get into good graces of Desdemona by giving jewels to Iago, who's supposed to in turn give them to Desdemona. But of course, Iago's stealing them and not, giving them. This jewel issue here, the jewels you have had from me, it's a deliberate kind of sexual pun on Shakespeare to remind us of the kind of effeminacy, if you will, of Roderigo. Think of what we call today the family jewels, male testicles. That what he's kind of suggesting here is that he's really not manly enough to go do it himself, to try to court or woo Desdemona himself. And that's what a fop or a dandy would do. And so it represents Roderigo. But it's also a kind of reminder that, it is as we'll learn, between the women, the jewels, the family jewels, are the sort of, epicenter of reproduction, and thus what Emilia will call treasures. Roderigo says, I will make myself known to Desdemona. If she will return my jewels, I will give over my suit. Meaning, like, she's got me by the, what, in the kind of Shakespeare double entendre. So he tells, of course, Roderigo to be patient. And then in 4.3, Desdemona and Othello in on the scene. And this is where he's going to tell Desdemona to pray before she dies, basically. He tells you, get to bed on the instant, I'll be returned forthwith, dismiss your attendant there. Remember, that is dismiss formally and physically Emilia. Looks be done. In other words, so she's alone. And he tells Emilia, right, he bid me to dismiss you. Dismiss me, right? So Emilia helps Desdemona undress. And this is where we have this important scene between the two women. Desdemona says, my mother had a maid called Barbary, right? And so the footnote here reminds us, of a Barbary horse that had been referred to earlier in Act 1, but also of the Barbary coast that I showed you with that image of the, regent or ambassador to London. My mother had a maid called Barbary. She, Barbary, was in love, and she loved, proved mad and did forsake her. She, the maid, had a song of willow. An old thing was, but it expressed her fortune, and she died singing it. That song tonight will not go from my mind. So a clear foreshadowing, obviously. And she begins to sing this song about the willow, sing willow, willow, willow. And the willow tree here really represents Desdemona. So what you guys may know about the willow tree, unlike, say, a hickory or oak, is that it has very pliable branches and limbs. It has a lot of moisture content in its bark. So, right, they tend to bend and not break. And you've probably seen, there are different species of cypress, obviously. You've probably seen them in and around water, like, maybe in a bayou. And they call this, the weeping willow, right? So this is what Desdemona is, like the branches, the limbs, right? She bends or complies to the will of Othello, which is why she's, singing the song. And then she says, oh, these men, dost thou think in conscience, dost thou in conscience think, or, really think, to me, or tell me, Emilia, that there be women who do abuse their husbands in such gross kind? That is, do you think there are women who cheat on their husbands? It's very interesting how Emilia responds to this situation or this question. There be some such, no question, but yeah, of course. Remember, Iago thinks that, Emilia here has slept with Othello, but he can't prove it. Wouldst thou do such a deed for all the world? Like, would you sleep, with someone and cheat on your husband for all the world? Why, would not you? Huh, interesting response. And there's a joke made here, a sexual joke. No, by this heavenly light, that is, no, I would not sleep, would not cheat on my husband by the light of day, basically. Nor I neither by this heavenly light. I might do it as well in the dark, right? Rim shot, boom, psh. And Desdemona, wouldst thou do such a thing for all the world? The world's a huge thing. It's a great price for a small vice. So Emilia here thinks that cheating on your husband is, you might call it uh, a venial sin in Catholicism as opposed to a mortal sin like rape or murder. But they're talking here about the whole world. And Desdemona responds, in truth, I think so would not. That no, you wouldn't. In truth, I think I should, and undo it when I had done, meaning make it look like I hadn't done it once I had done it. So we're talking here about adultery, about cuckolding. Mary, I would not do such a thing for a joint ring, like, small, footnote says here, kind of cheap little, like gumball ring, nor for measures of lawn, like, for an estate, or acreage, nor for gowns, petticoats, nor caps, nor any petty exhibition, but for the whole world, like, to be like the queen, or to be in charge of the whole world, if you will. Uds or God's pity, important line. Who would not make her husband a cuckold to make him a monarch? Right? Like, what woman wouldn't sleep with someone else if it ensured that your husband would become a king or, CEO or former vice president? So, Emilia still can't believe it. Beshrew me if I would such a wrong for the whole world. And then this discussion here about men by Emilia. She's very kind of savvy in her take on men. That yes, a dozen many women who would do that to the advantages of store the worlds they play for. But I do think that is their husband's fault if wives do fall, right? So this is the whole cuckold thing about, women aren't being taken care of or not being looked after, or, men are not being attended enough or loving enough. Say that, and she's going to list some, possibilities. Say that they slack their duties. Here they gloss it as their marital duties, meaning sex. So let's say they do that. Let's say they don't have sex with us or have sex with us as often, and pour our treasures into foreign laps. That's that kind of Shakespearean reference again to jewels, the family jewels, right? And the foreign laps, of course, would be if, they're soldiers, and they are soldiers, Othello's a general and Cassio was lieutenant and ensign for Iago, that they go off, like soldiers do, and they fight. So let's say they, don't have sex with us at home, but they have affairs while they're out in the field or deployed. Or let's say else they break out in peevish jealousies, which of course Othello has become, throwing restraint upon us, right? Which certainly by sending, dismissing Emilia, as a chambermaid, and telling Desdemona to go to her room, that's a kind of restraint. Or say they strike us, right? Which of course Othello has done in public. Or scant our former having in despite. Why we have galls, that is, we women have galls, chutzpah, you might say. And though we have some grace, yet we have some revenge. And the revenge is, let husbands know their wives have sense like them. Sense on the one hand of rational, logical sense, but also physical sense, like, needs, drives. They see and smell and have their palates for both sweet and sour, as husbands have. So wives are like their husbands, right? What is it they, men, husbands, what is it they do when they change us for others? Is it sport or is it like a game? I think it is. And doth affection breed it? Does lust breed the sport or the game? I think it doth. It's frailty that thus errs. I think it is so too. or it is so too. And have we not affections, we wives, and have we not affections, desires for sport or sex, and frailty as men have? Well, of course, yes. Then let them use us well, meaning treat us well, not use as in abuse or use, but let husband treat or use us well, or else let them know that the ills we do, the cheating we do, their ills instruct us so. So it's sort of the cuckoldress, not complaint, but defense, really. In Act 5, the scene between Iago and Roderigo is where he's going to basically create another fight, stand here, wear a good rapier. Rapier is a sword. And he's talking here about having Roderigo stab Cassio, right? So he says here, in an aside, remember, Roderigo can't hear this. I've rubbed this young quat or pimple, right? Like he's been, just goading Roderigo to the nth degree. I rubbed this young quat or pimple almost to the sense, and he, Roderigo, grows angry. Now, whether he kill Cassio or Cassio him, or each do kill the other, every way makes my gain, right? So he even admits here that he bobbed or stole the jewels from Roderigo that he never, of course, gave to Desdemona. So enter Cassio, and then immediately Cassio and Roderigo get into a fight because Roderigo starts it. And notice that Cassio stabs Roderigo, right? So now Roderigo is going to die. And then Iago wounds Cassio from behind. What we will learn is this is not a fatal wound, but in other words, Iago's not, he's trying to, tie up loose ends, so to speak, right? But he's also actually supposed to, murder Cassio according to Othello. And then Othello comes in, and we begin to see, the whole, as they say, blood-spotted passage here. Iago comes in as though, he went out very quickly as though he wasn't involved in this fight. But of course, that's Cassio says, that's one of them, right? He's talking about Roderigo. And Iago stabs Roderigo as, oh, murderous slave, oh, villain, right? And so talking about tying up loose ends, right? He's stolen his jewels, and he's no use to Iago anymore because he's already, stabbed Cassio, which is exactly, what he wanted him to do, or at least get in a fight with Cassio. And then, of course, he will die. Bianca enters the scene. This is a tragedy. People must die. And finally, down here, Bianca's in on the scene as well. Cassio goes out in a chair or stretcher, and Iago is going to frame Bianca as being the one who's guilty of this, right? Look ye pale, mistress, right? To Bianca, do you perceive the ghastness of her eye? Nay, and you stare, we shall hear more anon, right? If you stare, I'm not going to say anything. Behold her well, I pray you look upon her, right? Do you see, gentlemen? Nay, guiltiness, right? Of course, he's just trying to throw suspicion where he can and how he can. His wife, Emilia, enters the scene. He calls her a strumpet, Emilia calls Bianca a strumpet, though she kind of is. She is a courtesan. So we already have one person dead, that's Roderigo. And then in Act 5, Scene 2 here, this is the famous sort of scene where he says in this line that he will put out the light, then put out the light. What he means here, of course, is to put out the candle, the one light, but also the light of his life, because he's just, talked about her Desdemona's skin as smooth as alabaster, which of course is white. And he says here the reason or justification, rationale for killing her, right? He says, yet I'll not shed her blood. So, nice. He's not going to stab her. He's going to choke her, smother her, nor scar that whiter skin of hers in snow, smooth as alabaster, monumental alabaster. However, or yet she must die, or else she'll betray more men. So that's his justification for killing his wife. And then he's going to kiss her and says, one more kiss, right? And I will kill thee. It's always surprised me how Desdemona is just not like scratching his eyes out and screaming for help. But again, she's pliable. She's, the willow, if you will. And he says, have you prayed tonight, Desdemona? Again, the familiar Desdemona. If you bethink yourself of any crime unreconciled as yet to heaven and grace, solicit or ask for it straight. She's like, what? What do you mean by that? Well, do it and be brief. I'll walk by or I'll stand by. I would not kill thy unprepared spirit. No, heavens forfend, I would not kill thy soul. In other words, well, nice guy. So he realizes he's going to kill her body, but in Christian theology, especially Catholicism, there's this dual mind, soul body split, right? That your soul goes to heaven or hell or purgatory, and your body no longer lives. So nice guy. He's going to basically allow her to confess any sin, like adultery, so she can, be confessed and kind of absolved of sin before she dies, right? Yeah, and I hope you will not kill me. Well, so much for that. And he says, the circumstantial evidence, that handkerchief which I so loved and gave thee, thou gavest to Cassio. But of course, it's not true. And in her defense, she says, no, by my life and soul, send for the man, send for Cassio, right, and ask him. But of course, he doesn't. That is, Othello does not heed her. And, I saw the handkerchief, and she tells him again, send for him hither, let him confess the truth, right? But of course, at this point, Othello believes that Cassio's dead, which makes her cry. She's like, well, Othello's like, why are you crying for Cassio? And then that enrages him, so he begins to smother her. It's either choking, or in the film they show smothering with a pillow, but either way it's being suffocated. Emilia comes at the door, and this is a little bit tugging on our willing suspension of disbelief, because it takes a long time for Desdemona to actually die, like not dead, not quite dead. And she actually talks in a moment. It says Othello and Emilia talk about, like, that Roderigo's killed and Cassio's not. And of course, this incenses Othello even more because he wanted Iago to kill Cassio. And then before she actually dies, she says, a guiltless death I die. Right? Emilia, oh, who had done this deed? Of course, it's Othello. Right? And then finally she dies. And Emilia, realizes at this point that Othello has just killed, the most precious creature on the planet. She's a liar, gone to burning hell. 'Twas that I killed her, like he believes that she really committed adultery. Oh, the more angel she is, right? And you the blacker devil, right? Again, that kind of racial slur about Othello's darkness. She turned to folly, and she was a whore. Thou dost belie her, and thou art a devil. She was false as water. Water meaning that, if you water does stay put, it goes wherever it wants, like a prostitute or whore would. Cassio did top her, have sex with her, right? And then he says that, I learned all this from your husband, from Iago, and she can't believe it. She's like, my husband, she keeps repeating it. Woman, I say thy husband, does not understand the word. Curious thing here about that word husband is the word husbandry, which is connected to the word, means one who is in charge of siring animals or breeding animals, basically. So if you want to, we might say a dog breeder, but you could say a dog husbandry outfit or organization. So of course, it makes sense that she would be asking about her husband because he has been, supposedly believing that she and Othello have been breeding together, so to speak, or committing adultery. Anyway, Montano, Graciano, and Iago coming on the scene. Now, Graciano is an actual nobleman or aristocrat from Venice, and he is there to kind of help tie up, the end of the play. So Emilia confronts her husband. Disprove this villain if thou beest a man. Like, if you're a real man, you'll tell this villain who just killed, meaning Othello, who just killed Desdemona. If you're a man, you'll tell him he's wrong. He says, thou toldest him that his wife Desdemona was false. And of course, I told him what I thought, right? Not what was true, but what I thought, what was in my imagination in terms of a scheme, and told no more than what he found himself was apt and true, which is true, like, circumstantial evidence, the ocular proof, so to speak. And, she just continues to confront him. And remember early in Act 2, when they're getting off the boat, he chides her for having too much speech or tongue, right? And this is where he tells her to basically shut up. That is, did you say with Cassio? With Cassio, mistress, go to, that is, go away, charm your tongue, or silence your tongue. I will not charm or silence my tongue. I'm bound to speak, right? And then again, he says, I charge you to get home, like basically shut up and leave. And Othello is falling on the bed, weeping now that he's killed Desdemona, when he learns that he's actually been put up to this by Iago. And Othello says, but yet Iago knows that she with Cassio had the act of shame committed 1,000 times. Cassio confessed it, right? And Emilia doesn't shut up, and she is about to tell the truth on her own husband, right? He again says, be wise and get you home. I will not. Iago draws a sword on his own wife. And then this is where the kind of truth comes in. Oh, thou dull Moor, that handkerchief thou speakest of, I found by fortune, not really by fortune because it was just dropped, and did give my husband, for often with solemn earnestness, more than indeed belonged to such a trifle, he begged me to steal it. And then, of course, fill in his whore because he didn't want the truth to come out, right? And then right here says that Iago wounds or stabs his wife, right? And she will, like her maid or lady, Desdemona, die in a moment. And before she dies, though, she says, Moor, she was chaste. She loved thee, cruel Moor. And then Emilia dies. So Iago has just a moment ago stabbed Cassio in the leg, not fatally wounded him, but now he's just fatally killed his wife. And then Graziano comes back in on the scene. And we're presented here with Cassio wounded in a chair, like a stretcher, but not dead. And Lodovico says, where's this rash and most unfortunate man, meaning Othello? And Othello, he speaks of himself like Cassio did earlier in the third person, not here I am, but that's he that was Othello, right? Because I'm no longer that man, having just killed my wife. And this little line here is about this long-standing tradition that the devil has cloven hooves like a goat or a camel or any creature that has a hoof that is split in two. I look down toward his feet, meaning Iago's feet, but also the devil's feet. But that's a fable because it says here to look at the devil's cloven feet. We get the word cleave, which means simultaneously to cleave together, but also to cleave apart. It's like a cleaver would cleave something in two. And he says to Iago, if thou beest a devil, I cannot kill thee. And then he stabs Iago. Lots of stabbing going on, it is a tragedy after all. So he's basically saying that, if you're a devil, you won't die. And the irony is that he doesn't die. That is to say, of all the people who do not die on this stage, it is Iago who, in fact, should die, right? Let's see. Then we have before Othello dies himself, he's going to give this very kind of famous speech here. And he says, pray you in your letters that nothing, here, I pray you in your letters, when you write about me, when you shall these unlucky deeds relate to other people, and like this play, speak of me as I am, like, tell the truth, nothing extenuate, nor set down aught in malice, just tell it like it is. Then must you speak of one that loved not wisely, but too well. That is, of one who was driven by jealousy, and he loved her so much that his jealousy smothered her, that he loved her too well. Think of, domestic violence situations. Of one not easily jealous, but being wrought. There's that word wrought, like as if you ever seen something called wrought iron, where it's twisted iron, right? That's what Iago had been doing to Othello's imagination and mind, one perplexed in the extreme, right? And so he's going to, after this speech, stab himself, right? And it's just a reminder that it's kind of ironic, not kind of, it's really ironic that, they had called him valiant Othello, one who has valor, right? But stabbing yourself is the least valorous thing you can do, right? It's what we might call the coward's way out in terms of a death, rather than being sentenced to death or facing a firing squad. And then the play finally ends with Lodovico assigning the duties of who will do what, right? He says, look on, he's talking to Iago, look on this tragic loading of this bed. This is thy work, I mean, you villain. Then Graziano, keep the house. So Graziano is going to, look to the house that they're in there on Cyprus and seize upon the fortunes of the Moor. That is, goes to next of kin, because both Desdemona and Othello are dead, for they succeed on you. So Graciano is, related to Brabantio, member of the family. And to you, Cassio, to you, Lord Governor, remains the censure of this hellish villain. That is, he's putting Cassio in charge of sentencing Iago, the time, the place, the torture, enforce it, right? And so that's the end of the play. You have everyone, not everyone, Cassio's alive and Iago's alive, but, in order, Roderigo, Desdemona, and Roderigo, Desdemona, Emilia, and Othello die. So that was it, folks. And that was Acts 3 and 5 for quiz number 10, the final quiz this coming Monday. So hope you all are doing well and take care.